I want to begin by thanking all of the contributors to this service. It is so wonderful to see the faces of our beloved people. And I want to also say it's been a great gift today to have Julie Homey with us on the piano. It's just lovely when Julie is with us, so we're grateful for that. And I want to say good morning again, friends. When my beloved colleague, Reverend Rodney Lemery, and I were planning these two services, we wanted them to bookend what we knew was going to be a long and difficult and uncertain week, and which we did not know, even as we constructed much of the service, what the end result would be. We are glad to stand beside you, up in front of you today, knowing that we are on a path of some hope. And yet, we know what a long, strange, mind-numbing, heartbreaking, hopeful, exhausting, difficult, uncertain time this has been and has been for more than 5 years. A collective holding of the breath has been going on, so I would invite us in a very COVID-safe way to exhale. For many hard days, we have survived additional injury to our souls by trying to live in the moment. So on this day, with some relief, let us live in this moment too, a moment when we can all breathe a little bit more freely. And let us be grateful for the narrow, agonizingly slow to birth new path before us, which from my perspective has never been about candidates, but rather about ending the state of bully nation and removing an incarnation of hate that has put so many in bodily harm and even more in spiritual trauma. Let us be grateful to those and honor those who worked so hard to make sure this happened, who did postcard writing and phone banking and leadership and poll monitoring and vote counting, and who ran for public office for the first time, who voted for the first time, who voted for the umpteenth time, even though it was harder, who kept encouraging all around them. We who know too many will die if a deadly mutating virus is treated like a political football are more hopeful this morning that we can reduce the loss of life. We who know our nation must take a leadership role if we are to do what we can to lessen the impacts of climate change on our world are breathing a little bit more today. And we who tear up to hear a national leader talk about science are slowing the pace of our racing hearts. We who know the racial and economic inequalities of our nation require insight, not inciting, slept a little better perhaps last night. So let us also in this moment remember what we have learned, that holding paradox is the joy and the possibility and the sorrow at the canyons of division which are now so clear among us as a nation, as neighbors, as family members, so we can hold the relief next to the recognition that we can and should take a break for our hearts and our spirits, and not too long of one, for we have much work to do. If we're bookending, as Reverend Rodney and I conceived these services, and if you consider my message last week as a continuation, if you consider my message this week as a continuation of last week's, I want to return to the words of Dr. Howard Thurman once more, Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, the spiritual muse of so many in the civil rights movement. His Jesus and the Dispossessed was great company when I inevitably woke at 2 or 3 in the morning in this endless week. He defined the dispossessed as those who see themselves as weak, composed to the strong and powerful people. He wrote this to the leaders of the struggles in his time who were among those designated in that weak role in society's hierarchy. Here are his words. It is clear then that for the weak, hatred seems to serve a creative purpose. It may be judged harshly by impersonal ethical standards, but as long as the weak see it as being intrinsically involved in the complicated technique of survival with dignity, it cannot easily be dislodged, despite all the positive psychological attributes of hatred that we have outlined. Hatred destroys finally the life of the hater. And while it lasts, burning in white heat, he says, its effect seems positive and dynamic. But at last, it turns to ash, for it guarantees a final isolation from one's others. Hatred bears deadly and bitter fruit. It is non-discriminating. True, it begins by exercising specific discrimination. This it does by centering upon the persons responsible for the situations which create the reactions of resentment, bitterness, and hatred. But once that hatred is released, it cannot be confined to the offenders alone. It is difficult for hatred to be informed as to objects once it gets underway. Hatred, Reverend Dr. Thurman reminds us, cannot be confined to offenders alone. And this is the great danger that remains among us following 5 years of sanctioned hate. Because we live in the age of both and not either or, we cannot deny the other great truth of this week, that our nation is divided as a nation can be. To indulge in the bulliness now will only create more work for ourselves in the future, and that is our great spiritual challenge in these times. And it occurred to me in the early hour of some day or another this week that what we have also learned is that many of us, perhaps even most of us, now feel dispossessed on either side of this divide. Most of us, I suspect, feel dispossessed, feel like we're in that weak position that Dr. Thurman talked about. And how we respond now will be seen by those who wake up feeling even more so this morning. Having just survived 5 years of watching the ugliest faces of retribution, let us remember what it felt like to be the victim of that hate and vow not to carry that forward. And let us remember that some among us don't feel that strong in this moment, still feel very vulnerable. Let us also allow them, as they need to, express that vulnerability. We want, ultimately, our sheltering walls to let love in and keep hate out. In this time of complicated truth, let me say to the people still feeling most vulnerable, newly dispossessed by changes in the courts, knowing that the expressed feelings of too many neighbors are now very apparent, wondering how anyone could use their lives and well-being for political gains in the ways that they have done, knowing who will redraw the maps for future elections. Please know this morning that we see you, that we witness you, that we will continue to journey with you. Maybe, after resting for a little while and putting up the feet for a few hours in this frantic world. I want to lift up today the work of the election defenders, an amazing coalition of those with much to lose, including people of color and poor people, who organized much of the Count Every Vote actions that took place around the nation this week. They also organized something else, what they call Joy to the Streets. And this was an alternative to the vindictive demonstrations that some said would happen this week. They instead invited people to bring their music and their dancing to the streets in these days. I personally, in the next few days, plan to do some dancing, though I'm tired enough it might just have to be some chair dancing, I have to say. But what would it be like? What would it be like, they invite us to think, if we were to take that sense of victory that we have, maybe some of us, and turn it not into I told you so's, but rather into I love you so's, to the people we most want to know that they are nothing less than beautiful to us. We have learned in these hard years that we can be both grateful and giving, released and committed, ecstatic and realistic, dance happy and downhearted, that nearly half our nation thinks that defending their self-interests means sacrificing the safety of their neighbors. And yes, to augment a post that I saw on Facebook in the wee hours of this morning today, we can be the people who challenge ourselves to look at the possibility of redemption that exists within each life and which gives each being inherent worth and dignity despite their ugly, hate-spewing, despicable, and humanity-denying actions, which we condemn fully through our values. We can be the people that believe in interdependence, which means that we can give up the temporary high with a hangover of revenge for the deep, abiding recognition that we do need one another, all of us, bound together, as frightening as that may be, or as improbable as it may seem in this moment today. So besides dancing, what are we supposed to do? Besides resting, what are we committing? What if we keep gathering as we can? Keep teaching our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren what the world is supposed to look like, what it might look like, what we have glimpsed little fractions of it looking like in our times. What if we keep paying attention to those who are still the target of hate, those still at risk for their lives, still jailed and caged, still impugned and reviled and targeted? What if we keep listening to those who are wise with firsthand knowledge of the risks and rewards before us? What if we keep listening to one another and we hear one another's truths and we hear and speak to each other about what we need to say? What if we keep showing up, keep offering what we can, keep being of service to the greater cause of humanity? What if we keep celebrating these small victories and moments, and we keep rolling up our sleeves? What if we keep remembering that we are indeed solid as a rock, rooted as a tree, and here, each one of us, no matter who we are, in our rightful place as part of the whole, messy, infuriating, inspiring, complicated, and challenging family of humanity. We shall be known by the company we keep. In this great turning, may we learn to lead in love. Can I get an amen? Amen. Blessed be.